Hello and good evening. For tonight's devotion, we are going to be talking about some very brave men, not only in the scriptures, in the Old Testament specifically, but also in history in World War II. So tonight's devotion is a treat for history buffs and Bible scholars. Yesterday at church, Pastor Wendy and myself, we both preached messages on the prophet Jeremiah and his messages of integrity, resilience, and continued perseverance and adaptability during the time of the Hebrew exile. So we discussed how important it is for us as we are living in exile to continue to persevere, to live as people of integrity, and to adapt and change as we need to, so that we will bloom and flourish where we have been planted. Tonight, we will go into the prophet Daniel, who was also a prophet during the Babylonian exile with the Hebrew people. And Daniel had King Nebuchadnezzar, who was the Babylonian king, to deal with at the time. King Nebuchadnezzar had built this giant golden idol, and he wanted everyone to bow down to it. And the problem with the Babylonian exile is not only were the Hebrew people forced into captivity, but a lot of them had to relinquish their culture, their identity, and their faith. And there was just a lot of assimilation and syncretism where they would kind of sort of follow Yahweh God, but a lot of them started to do what the Babylonians would do and worshiping the deities that the Babylonians worshipped and listening to the king of Babylon instead of God, Yahweh. So in the story in Daniel chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar sets up this giant golden image and tells everybody when the music plays and you hear the music, I want you all to bow down and worship this golden image. And whoever does not bow down and worship this golden image will be cast into a fiery furnace. So King Nebuchadnezzar plays the music, and all of a sudden, some of Nebuchadnezzar's officials say, look over there, king. There are some Hebrew people, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abendego, that are not only paying any attention to you as king, but they're not serving your gods or worshiping this new idol, this golden image that you have set up. So this made Nebuchadnezzar furious. And we read in Daniel chapter 3, verse 13, these words. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these Hebrew men, to be brought to him. So they brought these men before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true that you will not serve my gods or worship the old golden image that I have set up? If you are ready, please bow down when you hear the music. Fall down and worship these images that I have made well and good. But if you do not worship, you will be thrown into the fiery furnace. And who will deliver you then? What God will deliver you out of my hands? So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. But if not, be it known to you, O king, we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression on his face changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So he ordered the furnace heated 7 times more it was normally heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men in the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and other garments, and were thrown into the furnace. Because the king's order was urgent and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed the men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, swallowed them up, the Babylonian officials. And the 3 Hebrew men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared, "Did we not cast the men into the fire?" "Well, yes, King," they answered, "but I see 4 men unbound walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the door of the burning fiery furnace, and he declared, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And all of the officials and everyone that saw the fire realized the power that these men had, the God that these men served. The hair of their heads was not even singed. Their cloaks were not harmed, and no smell of fire came upon them. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants, who trusted in him and set aside the king's command, yielded up their bodies rather than to serve any false god other than their own. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no God who is able to rescue in the way that their God is." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to the province in Babylon. So, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were heroes that day because they would not serve, bow down, or worship the king, Nebuchadnezzar, or the false gods and idols that Nebuchadnezzar was commanding everyone to worship. They were not backing down. They were brave. They stuck to their word. They had faith and courage and trust in the Almighty, one true God, Yahweh. And God was with them. God did not keep them from the flames, but God walked with them in the flames. And that is the important thing, is that no matter what situation we are in, God will be with us. Now, on to the World War II history. Did you know that this story in the Old Testament in Daniel chapter 3 is actually also playing mighty heavily in the story of Dunkirk? This story is connected with the miracle that happened at Dunkirk. 80 years ago, this month in June, in 1940, the German Nazis had the British and French forces surrounded off the northern coast of France and Dunkirk. The British Navy could not rescue them, and the men were not able to fight their way out. It looked as if all of the naval troops from Britain and France would not survive. The British and the French knew they would be safe if they could just get across the English Channel and out of France, but it didn't seem like there were any resources they had or time to stage some sort of a escape. So one British officer who knew this story of Daniel chapter 3 sent out a 3-word telegram to all of the war offices in London that said, "But if not, but if not." This phrase communicated to all of the people back home in Britain that the men in Dunkirk were stranded and they were in a hopeless situation where they needed help. They needed rescue, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were praying desperately that God would be with them. But if not, God was still good. But if not, they would still be faithful. But if not, they would go fighting with integrity and love. And so they sent the telegram out, and they thought all was lost. They thought that the 338,000 men in Dunkirk would be surrounded and completely annihilated by the Nazi Germans who were coming. But under a cover of fog in the middle of the night came small fishing boats, cruisers, people's sailing ships, all piloted by the good people who lived on the coast. They came. All of Britain came to save the day because they heard the cry and they knew the story too. They knew that these were men stepping out against not Nebuchadnezzar, but Hitler. And they knew that they were not going to go down bending the knee to him. That if they would die and they would perish, God was still good. That they would be men with integrity. So just like Nebuchadnezzar's furnace was looming large in the story in Daniel chapter 3, those men prayed and waited and hoped that there would be rescue for them. Just like we see a fourth figure in the fiery furnace walking among the men, we see common, ordinary citizens stepping up and saving the day because they heard the call and they came to rescue. So this is a powerful testimony that God protected all of these men, the men in the Old Testament and the troops at Dunkirk. But hear me on this. All of these men were prepared to die. They knew that God was so big that regardless of what happened, God was bigger than this life. God was bigger than this battle, and that they would follow God even till the very end. And that this wasn't the end for them. And I love that phrase, that saying that Nebuchadnezzar was saying to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abendego in the scripture of, well, who will save you and rescue you from my hand, is what he says. We serve a God who will save. The British and the French soldiers who were trapped at Dunkirk were believers who were praying to our God to come and save and perform a miracle. And God did in the hands of so many civilians, local fishermen, young men, older grandpas, anyone who had a boat that heard the cry from London in the offices, but if not, they knew exactly what it meant and they came running. So God does not promise to keep us from the flames. God does not protect us from the fire, but God will walk with us through the fiery furnace. Just like there was a fourth person, Jesus, an angel, the divine, was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Know that whatever fiery furnace you are in, God has not left you or forsaken you. God is with you, and God will give you what you need. So I pray that you would have courage in the midst of battles, in the midst of bullies, in the midst of any adversity that you are facing. I pray that you would have courage and wisdom in the decisions, big and small, that you are making in your life, and that you would continue to resist the evil forces that surround you, whether they be Nebuchadnezzar, Hitler, or alike. We all have forces in our life that want us to bow down. Bullies, people who harass us, who taunt us, who are not godly people, who try to keep us down. So take heart and know that God is with us. Remember, but if not, God is still good. And if not, we will still worship. I love you all, and I am praying for all of you. I'll see you on Wednesday.